Good evening and welcome everybody to the Interstate 83 Exit 26 Land Use Meeting. My name is Felicia Dell, and in a few minutes I'm going to hand it over to Dave Naylor, a local supervisor from East Manchester Township, but I wanted to offer you a few comments this evening. I serve as the director of the York County Planning Commission, and when we were coming up with the title for the meeting tonight, it's pretty straightforward. It's the Interstate 83 Exit 26 Land Use Meeting. And it sounds a little funny though when you think about it. It includes the words both interstate, which conjures up pictures of moving highways or maybe congested highways. And it also includes land use, which conjures up pictures of maybe development or zoning maps. And those two things don't always sound like they go together. And then to top it all off, it includes the words exit 26. And for those of you that travel Interstate 83 on a regular basis, you'll know there isn't an exit at mile marker 26. So what are we actually going to be talking about tonight? We're actually going to tie all of those things together. We're going to tie together Interstate 83. We're going to tie together land use into that. And we're also going to talk about an interchange that doesn't exist yet, but is proposed at mile marker 26. So in my capacity as the director of the York County Planning Commission, we have a wide array of responsibilities that we fulfill to the county commissioners and to the York community. And one of those responsibilities is to conduct transportation planning that identifies improvements that are needed for our transportation network. And we work with federal and state officials to program funds to make those needed improvements to our network. Now, the transportation planning is performed by a very talented staff, and we're guided by a governing body called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO for short. The MPO is comprised of designated stakeholders such as the county commissioners, planning commissioners, our legislators, local municipal officials, and other transportation stakeholders. This group, the MPO, ensures that projects that are needed are prioritized, funded, and constructed for the improvement of our transportation network. Now, one of the more significant transportation corridors that's been prioritized for a lot of improvements over the last several years is Interstate 83. For decades, there's been a desire to add more lanes to the highway, complete incomplete interchanges, improve failing interchanges, and even add new interchanges to this corridor. And a lot of the improvements that you see occurring today on that corridor, such as the interchanges at Mount Rose Avenue that are upgraded, the interchange at Shrewsbury, or even the crossroads of Interstate 83 and Route 30, are all under design or construction based on interest plans and proposals that were prioritized for funding through the MPO. And those projects have been planned and programmed for decades in some cases. Some of the conversations and the plans about those improvements go back to the early 1990s. So Interstate 83 has been receiving a lot of investment. And so tonight we will be discussing the land use for an interchange that doesn't exist yet. We're calling it Exit 26. Some people call it the Canal Road interchange. But this concept for this interchange is to improve Interstate 83 access, and it's been discussed, as I said, for a long time, just like all of the others, by the MPO, local municipalities, and other interest groups. It's risen in priority for consideration now based on the need to improve congestion at other locations on the interstate corridor. And Will Clark, our Chief of Transportation Planning, will be presenting the background information on that in a few minutes. But I wanted to leave you with a thought that by participating in this meeting this evening and this process, you are participating in something that's very unique in transportation planning. And what I mean by that is that you have to keep in mind that transportation improvements aren't usually done in anticipation of something occurring. A lot of times you'll see development proposed and then a signal light will go up, or some sort of a business park is proposed and then a turning lane is constructed. You'll see a lot of congestion occurring on a highway, and then you'll see a lane added to the highway. So transportations improvements are usually done in reaction to something as opposed to being done in a proactive manner. And this is largely because there aren't enough funds to address all the things that we need to do to improve the transportation network, much less do anything in anticipation of something occurring. So just remember that a lot of times it's reactive and there's never enough money to do everything that needs to be done. But tonight is your chance to participate in something in the transportation realm in a proactive manner. You have the chance to shape this land use around an interchange that hasn't been built yet. As a matter of fact, the interchange hasn't been funded yet. It hasn't been approved in concept by the Federal Highway Administration yet. So there's not even a design for it. But if and when the interchange is approved and is funded and is designed, we want to know that we have a land use and a zoning plan that will set it up for success. You have a chance to take proactive steps to make sure that we don't allow the impacts of development to burden the interchange to the point that it's not serving the function it was intended to do, which is provide access to the interstate. So I want to thank you for participating tonight. I look forward to your involvement not only in this meeting, but upcoming meetings. And now I'll hand it over to Dave Naylor for opening remarks from one of our local officials who's involved in this effort.
Thank you, Felicia. And good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's meeting. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Supervisors for East Manchester Township. East Manchester Township also has in attendance tonight Township Manager Christy Mazimer and Public Works Director Shane Howe. We want you to know that we are here for any concerns or questions that you may have from the Township's point of view. And with that, I thank you again for being on tonight's and participating on tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll pick it up from here. My name is Michelle Bremer, and I'm the Consultant Project Manager from Gannett Fleming for the Exit 26 Land Use Plan. On behalf of Conewago, East Manchester, Manchester Townships, and Manchester Borough, we want to thank you for participating in tonight's presentation as you watch the slides on the screen, but also as you might contribute questions and comments through the Q&A feature. I wanted to start with the two primary purposes for tonight's meeting. The first is to introduce the I-83 master plan and its proposed exit 26 as kind of the context for what our work is really about. But it's really essential background information that'll give you an understanding of why this land use plan is being prepared, particularly at this time. Will Clark, in just a few minutes, will talk about the master plan, the proposed exit, and we'll take a break then and have kind of a Q&A session about those topics before we go into the part 2 of the meeting. I'll lead on that presentation, talking about what land use planning is, the need for it now, the process we're going to use to walk through preparation and adoption, and where we're looking for public input through a series of public meetings and surveys. And specifically, we'll walk through survey number 1 and introduce you to what that will look like. I'll take some questions and answers at the end of part 2 of our presentation, and that'll wrap up our meeting for tonight. Next slide, please. I thought we should introduce our planning team tonight. There's some folks you will see visually as presenters, and then we've got some other staff working behind the camera to assist us. Will Clark, Ben Dinkle, and Roy Livergood, in addition to Felicia Dell, are from the York County Planning Commission. The consultant team tonight includes myself, Tracy Vernon, who will also present. Jay Scott and Michaela Mummer are from Gavin Advertising, a York-based company. They're helping with our public relations and communication strategy, and they'll be helping us manage the meeting and manage the Q&A as you submit those. Next. A couple of reminders here about how we're conducting the meeting. We are recording the meeting, and it will be posted at the project website, i83exit26.com. So if you feel there's other folks who might not have had an opportunity to tune in tonight, That'll be available for them to watch and listen at a later point in time and get all of the same background information that you're receiving this evening. Because of the presentation nature of what we're talking about, we've muted all of the attendees, but the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen, is where you could submit questions or comments for us to consider. The chat feature is off for this particular meeting. We'd like to keep a little bit more of a Q&A tone to the interaction that we have at the breaks between major topics. We're also streaming live on Facebook. Viewers who might be seeing us there can put comments or questions in Facebook posts, and we'll be reviewing those after the meeting and updating the project website if that generates any new information that would be useful for us to share at this point. Again, we've got this website listed on this screen. You'll see it several times throughout the meeting. This is our landing page. This is the place for project information, meeting notices, current surveys, as well as contact information for Will Clark and myself. So you can always reach out to us through this easy to remember I-83 exit26.com. All right, Will Clark, I think we're up for you on the background to the I-83 master plan and its focus on exits, the portion exits 24 to exit 26. Over to you. Will, can I ask you to pause? We're not picking up the audio. At least I'm not on my end. Can we check that, please?
Can you hear now?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Just wanted to say good evening and thank you everyone for attending and taking time out of your schedule and participating in our planning process. It is very appreciative of our staff and the municipal officials as we go through this process. So thank you. My name again is Will Clark. I'm the Chief of Transportation Planning at the York County Planning Commission. I've been here for over 22 years. And on this first slide in my presentation, you can see a newspaper article from 1998, which is basically the first couple weeks that I started here on the job. And one of the newspaper articles is concerning the exit 26 interchange. This was advertising and discussing a meeting that was happening back in 1998 and talking about the process and moving through. It is not a new effort in any stretch of the imagination. It has been talked about for a long time, but projects of this magnitude should take some time to develop to make sure that we're going through the proper process. In addition, as Felicia mentioned, in 2003, we looked at many interchanges along the interstate system in York County, and this was not prioritized. Exit 4, exit 18, Mount Rose Avenue, exit 19, they were all prioritized along with exit 30 or US Route 30 exit, exit 21. They were all prioritized prior to exit 26 becoming a priority. So all those projects are in some phase of construction or funding or planning. So it's time to look at what is the next location that we should concentrate on. What is the next priority for York County? And exit 24 actually is rising to the top of that table. To be clear, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that the decision to build a new interchange, as Felicia mentioned, is not approved and not prioritized at the MPO level yet. What is approved and prioritized is to address the problems at exit 24, Emmetsville. So the Church Road exit and the congestion that is listed there is what we are really concentrating on moving forward with and trying to come up with a solution. There are many decision points along the road that we have to go through before we get to a final decision. The federal level, the state level, and at the local level through the MPO process, the Metropolitan Planning Organization process, before there is a final decision. What Felicia mentioned and what I'm asking again is to concentrate on not whether you support or don't support an interchange, but if an interchange would be prioritized and move forward through the process, what would the land use look like? Because that is part of the decision-making process of whether interchange is prioritized or not through the process. Just an example of that is, although it's not the exact same level, just a little story. My wife and I are going through car shopping and we're looking for a different car, and she may want a sports car and I may want a station wagon. And we're going through that process, and we may ultimately decide to go with the station wagon. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't get to help with the decisions about the color of the car, the other accessories, the cost, whether it's a new or a used car. So it's kind of the same thing, that the interchange might be the type of car that we go after, but the land use and all the other items that go along with that interchange decision are also those accessories that everybody should be playing into, not just the people that choose to support or prioritize an interchange. So going on with that process as well too, as we go through the land use process, hopefully that will give people more information about whether to support or not support an interchange, or whether it should be prioritized or not prioritized based on what the land use would be around there. If I can go to the next slide, please. What you see on the presentation slide here is the report on congestion. Every few years we complete a report on congestion. We look at travel time throughout the entire county, and we identify intersections that are operating below our desired levels. So there is a increased delay in travel time at these locations. All the blue dots represent that throughout the county. And the red circle in the middle of the map identifies the Church Road and the Canal Road area that we're talking about tonight. So that's one area that helped to push this one forward. If I could go to the next slide, please. In addition, we also complete an I-83 traffic and conditions report, and this looks at a lot of information that we collect, from traffic volumes to crash data. And one of the things that we look at is the queue time. So how much time are people sitting on the off-ramps of the different interstate exits? Exit 24 is shown on the map. The green area is where the ramp is separated from the main line of 83. The yellow area shows where it's parallel to I-83, and then the red area is where there is no ramp. We measure how much time people sit in the red area, and exit 24 in the morning hours is the highest level of delay, or people sitting on that part of the ramp in the morning of all the interstate exits that do not have funding associated with them. So armed with all this information, the York Area Metropolitan Planning Organization identified a study to look at this corridor, at the Church Road corridor, as its priority from a congestion standpoint to address. They started moving through that process. At the same time, additional discussions came up to talk about the Canal Road interchange and possibly looking at that. So what we did was we expanded the scope, the original concept, to improve exit 24, to look at exit 24 through 28 and look at the circulation as a whole. This is done so that we can identify there might be other improvements that would be more cost effective, better for the community, if we look at it more holistically than if we just go and fix the problem where it's located, which is exit 24. Overall, in the I-83 master plan study, you will see that the total cost for the improvements, if we just fix exit 24, are higher than if we do exit 26 and the resulting improvements around that area. So it is one of the things that we are taking into consideration. If I could go to the next slide, please. One, I missed talking about this one, but one of the other things that brought this to the top of the list is this section of I-83. This is representing all the fatal crashes that have occurred in the 20 years from 1997 to 2017. This is included in our I-83 traffic and conditions report. The area that's highlighted there with the arrow, exit 24 to 28, had a total of 8 crashes that resulted in a fatality. That was the highest level, tied with eight crashes for the Market Street to Route 30 section as well in that time period. So that plus the congestion was the reason that exit 24, this 24 area, jumped to the top. If I can have the next slide, please. So what you see on the slide right now is the website for I-83. The website has the master plan is located up in the top left corner, and you can access that at i83exit26.com, and that is the website, and you can access the entire plan at that location. All this information is included in that document, so I didn't want to talk about a whole lot of the projects or the information that's coming out of this, but since transportation is the reason for this meeting, but not what we want to focus on tonight, I'm just going to touch on a few things. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, if you can go one more. So these projects here, this plan also, I'm sorry. So what did the master plan recommend? It was strictly a transportation plan. There were several options developed, and one of them is just to make exit 24 Emmetsville larger, as I mentioned before. The other concept is to build a new interchange at Canal Road, exit 26, to disperse the traffic. At the end of the evaluation, from just a traffic evaluation standpoint, the standpoint, it was decided that a new interchange at Canal Road was something that should be recommended. The plan also mentioned that the new interchange does not fully solve the problems at exit 24, and that something in the future will still have to be done. The project will just not have to be as large if it handles all the traffic. Overall, as I mentioned, the total improvements under the exit 26 scenario are a lower cost than the improvements needed if exit 24 and 28 need to handle all the future traffic. On this slide now, you see pictures of the entire area that was addressed in the I-83 master plan. There are regional projects included as well on the left-hand side, that is Susquehanna Trail and Canal Road. In the top right, that is Musser and George Street. And then in the bottom right is Emmetsville and North George Street in Emmetsville. So those other areas surrounding the interchanges were also looked at to see what the impacts would be. Overall, the I-83 master plan study recommended a total of $280 million worth of projects at that location. So $280 million is a large amount of money to invest in the program. How will the master plan, how will we move forward with this? The Metropolitan Planning Organization that Felicia mentioned earlier, they receive an allocation of about $33 million a year to program and fund all the bridges and roads in the County of York. And again, we are talking about a $280 million recommendation for one area of the county. This would also include, if we could have the next slide, please. This would also include a recommendation that cost about $150 million to widen I-83 in this area from 2 lanes in each direction to 3 lanes in each direction. So that's $150 million of the $280 million, and that would be part of a routine maintenance process. So that is not part of the $33 million that we receive annually because it comes out of the interstate system at the state level. So let's assume that will be taken care of at a statewide. That's still $130 million that we have to fund out of that $33 million to implement a project of this magnitude. The Metropolitan Planning Organization developed another committee to identify the implementation of this program and try to work with the municipalities, the economic development, rapid transit, and other stakeholders to identify how we will move forward with implementing this project. At this point, the Metropolitan Planning Organization allocated a total of $13 million to implement projects that are coming out of the I-83 master plan. This was not an approval of a new exit. This was money set aside to implement the master plan, which, as I mentioned, is in the beginning and is trying to address one of the top priority areas of the county from a congestion and safety standpoint. This subcommittee, and working with all the stakeholders, will work on 2 of the biggest issues, which are, will the interchange at Canal Road ever even be approved by Federal Highway Administration? That is an unknown, and that is going to change how we move forward with the implementation plan. The other issue that we're looking at, or PennDOT is preparing information concerning that interchange, and then we'll be submitting that to Federal Highway sometime in 2021, probably about a year from now. We would not expect to have an answer until at least 2023 from Federal Highway concerning their answer. So what the implementation committee is looking at is which projects are beneficial under either scenario, whether exit 26 is approved by Federal Highway or exit 26 is not approved. What is the best use of that $13 million that can be utilized and beneficial now and also in either scenario? So they are going through that process to evaluate those projects in the master plan. Another item that needs to be looked at as part of this prioritization process concerns the land use and how will the land change if the new interchange is approved and funded. What I mean concerns the balance of transportation investments and value added to the community if a new interchange is placed. It reduces delay at exit 24. We have already identified that in the traffic side. But what kind of job growth, what kind of traffic safety does it enhance? What are the housing opportunities that a new interchange could provide? And what are impacts and benefits on the tax base in the area? If you can go to the next slide. So the picture that is identified on the slide at this point is the proposed interchange from the I-83 master plan. It is a diamond interchange. However, this is a conceptual. If approval happens at the Federal Highway Administration and funding is allocated, the final interchange may look like one of these other options. If you could advance. Could look like exit 24 in the design. It could look like exit 28, exit 34, or it could look like exit 10. These are details that are not really part of this meeting, or details that we're not really interested in moving forward with discussions, because that's a separate process later down the road. But these will be a different process that PennDOT handles during design. So to that point, I will defer questions on the layout or the operations of specific transportation improvements or impacts to right-of-way as part of this discussion. We can go to the next slide. So just as a summary, the need was established in the I-83 master plan. It was also established through the report on congestion and also the I-83 traffic and conditions report. The new point of access, as I mentioned, 2 to 3 years at a minimum, or 2 years as a minimum for the answer from Federal Highway Administration. And then as far as the project programming and funding, design and construction, we're talking about a period of at least 10 years. We have currently programmed the North York widening project. The North York widening project is getting ready to start next year, and that occurs from Market Street north to North George Street. And that is a several year different phases, but that will carry us up to basically 2020 or 2030 from a funding standpoint. So we're looking past that point and those priorities before we would talk about funding for something like this. I think at this point in time, if there are any questions in the question and answer period, we can take that from the comment or the question and answer section. If there are no questions, we can. I will turn it over to Michelle.
All right, that Q&A section will remain open throughout the meeting this evening. So if there's something you're mulling over in your head and you're not quite sure how to phrase it, take your time. Feel free to chat that into the Q&A box. And our staff will take a look at that and they'll help streamline those questions for us if needed, if there's a lot of duplication and so forth. I see that, Will, there is one that's kind of a follow-up to the plan. Do you want, it looks like it's kind of a timeline question. Would you want to address that? Just kind of recap the length of time it takes to address some of these major infrastructure kinds of needs.
Yes, I think the question is concerning about a safety issue. If it was identified as a safety issue, why is it taking 10 years? Well, the other location that I identified, the exit 19 to 22 or 21, that is the other priority that we have, and that is actually the one that is being funded. There are locations throughout the county. There is always going to be something at the top of the safety list. But what we do is we go through and we prioritize projects. The I-83 exit 19 to 21 section, it was ranked as a higher priority for a bunch of different reasons, including safety, and that is why that is moving forward first.
Thanks, Will. We'll keep an eye on that. I'll move along with the major part 2 of the presentation, and we can circle back toward the end and certainly address any that might overlap kind of the transportation planning side as well as the land use. So thanks for chiming in there. Well, appreciate the background and the status that you gave about the master plan. That work preceded my involvement, so greatly appreciate the detail and perspective that you could bring in sharing that for tonight. During this portion of the presentation, we'll talk about why the municipalities are planning now before a decision is made on the proposed exit 26. what lands are included in the planning area, and the process the implementation committee and the planning team are using to prepare a land use plan and bring it forward for public review and adoption. This will include some public meetings and interactive surveys that give you an opportunity to share thoughts, preferences, needs you see in the community in terms of either housing types, job growth, etc. So we'll use that to close out our presentation later. Let's go on to kind of establishing the need for this. Will noted that the proposed Exit 26 will need to pass several state and federal reviews, and that the final decision may not come for 2 years or more. And even if approved, opening day for Exit 26 could easily be a decade or more away. Lots of time, right? But not so much. While the decision on approval is not yet known, it's worthwhile to consider the impact of that pending decision and prepare to take actions as they might be needed. There's two sort of possible scenarios. If Exit 26 is not approved, municipalities, business might continue as usual. They might amend their zoning ordinances at the time that decision is released, knowing that the interstate will likely remain the same and that additional development could worsen existing congestion and add delays at exits 28 and exits 24 and exit 28. The more hopeful, perhaps, outcome is that Exit 26 is approved. Access to the interstate would improve for nearby parcels, and we can reasonably expect that development will build out lands currently zoned for residential, commercial, and industrial uses, and that development pressure on agricultural and open space lands could increase in the near term, even before the interchange is funded. So a land use plan for the Exit 26 area is needed for local governments, for public and private service providers, for PennDOT and other state agencies to effectively at least consider what improvements might be on the horizon for infrastructure and expansion of facilities and services. Next slide, please. Conewago, East Manchester, and Manchester Townships and Manchester Borough have all agreed to this. They recognize that people living and working in one municipality, they also travel through neighboring municipalities and overall increase the demand for services that are ultimately funded by local taxes. So the idea of working together to prepare a land use plan to provide a predictable future for what future development in this area would look like certainly benefits all of them. Property owners would know what activities are permitted on adjacent parcels and throughout their community. Developers would know the same, since developers approach property owners many times about what comes next or if they're interested in developing. Municipalities and service providers with a land use plan in place can project service needs and plan for facility and service area changes. Who might this be? This might be public safety departments, police departments, fire departments. Could be school districts looking at projected enrollment, not just total, but in terms of grade levels, and how those students would be distributed across maybe multiple elementary schools or different leveled facilities. Public and private utility companies might include water, sewer, natural gas, electric, telecommunications, and broadband. All of those utility and infrastructure pieces are important, and folks who live in the planning area today, businesses that operate, certainly are concerned about the reliability of those services, even as changes are made. So it's important that those kinds of companies have a sense of what new service demands might be coming. With a land use plan in place, municipalities can, of course, project changes in traffic flows and volumes. There's numbers that help us estimate how many trips will be made from each type of household or based on a business, how many employee trips, how many truck trips, et cetera, can be estimated. And that moves into traffic planning and some of the assessments that Will has already cited. Municipalities, the MPO, and PennDOT can rely on all of that information in the land use plan then to project those changes across both the state and the local system. Next, please. So the need for this land use plan has been discussed among the implementation committee members and agreed to by the 4 municipalities. The process requires preparation of the land use plan and then review and adoption as an amendment to each municipal comprehensive plan. This will make it official municipal policy and ready to implement through zoning once decisions on the interchange and funding approaches are reached. This process of preparing and adopting the plan could take up to a year. That's what we've estimated so far. The land use plan for Exit 26 is also supported by York County. Their participation and facilitation in the implementation committee has already been mentioned, as well as PennDOT. As Felicia mentioned in her opening remarks, planning for transportation and land use is a partnership. Transportation often by PennDOT for state system, and then local roads by municipalities, and land use is squarely in the municipal jurisdiction. But planning for both is a partnership. Doing so effectively takes working together. This kind of partnership is an example of what PennDOT refers to as PennDOT Connects, as it works with communities across the Commonwealth to consider what's the community's land use planning pattern today and plan for the future, and plan those things side by side as it looks at transportation projects. The PennDOT Connects program makes grants available to communities to support their local planning, and the MPO and the municipalities, in fact, applied to and were awarded a PennDOT Connects grant to prepare this land use plan so that it can inform the traffic projections and the design if indeed proposed Exit 26 is approved. Next slide. So finally, we get to a map. Here's our planning area. This amoeba-shaped planning area was determined by parcels that lie within a 5-minute drive time to the proposed Exit 26. That was an analysis that I believe York County prepared. Conewago Township asked that that planning area include lands west to Bull Road, so it's a little bit lopsided in terms of that 5-minute drive shed, but because such a large portion of their segment of the planning area is agricultural and open space, and their municipal border is at Bull Road, it made sense to extend it a little further along. How big is this area? It spans 4 municipalities, 2 school districts, 2 regional police departments, and 5 zip codes. In total, there are over 8,500 acres that we have in view. Some of it has already been developed. Some of it is today actively used for agriculture or passive open space kinds of uses. There's a lot of activities that go on here today. There are active development proposals in this area, and we are working to kind of tally that list together and have that in view as well. If you're interested in seeing this planning area and being able to zoom in and out and see if any particular property lies in the center, at the edge, on the border, just outside, the I-83 exit26.com website has an interactive map of the planning area. And you can take a look at that and see if your property is in the planning area, or someone you know, perhaps maybe some friends or family that you think, if they do own property here, might need to be involved or want to weigh in. So please point them to that. Next slide. So here's kind of an overview of what our planning steps are in our planning process. Currently, we're wrapping up our existing conditions documentation, looking at what land use patterns are on the ground right now, what supporting infrastructure is available, and like I said, what kinds of development proposals are on the tables with each of the local governments. Our next step will be to look at some of the future factors that go into what development might look like in the future, and that'll give us information to make some choices or to choose from some options. Those factors might include what's going on in the private market, both housing as well as industrial, what the community says there are needs for, different types of housing, whether it be senior housing or smaller units or mixed use housing and commercial kinds of things. We'll also take a real close look at the current municipal zoning policies that direct or permit land use change. That may, in fact, some of that may serve us well in the future, but certainly we'll want to make note of things that might need to adjust or propose should adjust. We'll prepare some map options under that second milestone so that we can sort of see on a map how those land uses might lay out. Those options might look very different from one another, or they might be relatively similar with some fine nuanced differences, and we'll be able to explain that, present that, and explain that to you at a future meeting. The third milestone is the options. What are those future land use alternatives, and how do we decide? That'll be a discussion for the implementation committee. How do we decide which of those options is best, or how to perhaps hybridize and come up with the best coordinated land use plan that works for all 4 municipalities? We'll then present a report, prepare a report that provides the documentation for this information and presents both the land use map as well as some other associated recommendations. As we're looking at existing conditions, we're certainly hearing about current conditions in infrastructure, maybe some need for adjustments and improvements. If more development comes, those needs become even more magnified. So we'll certainly be taking a look at some related recommendations for, say, locally owned roads, township and roads and borough streets, for housing, for parks and recreation, for those utilities, so that all of those parts are really working together to support that draft land use plan that we bring forward. The final milestone is perhaps the longest in duration. That's review and adoption as an amendment to the municipal comprehensive plans. And that process will need to follow the process outlined in the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. There will be meetings associated with that. We have not yet scheduled those. We need to get through our first milestones here. I've put in a public input column here to indicate approximately when different activities will be occurring. You know, since we're starting off the process publicly tonight, I've listed meeting 1 here with existing conditions, and Tracy Vernon's going to share a little bit about that in just a few minutes. We hope to complete that roughly by the end of the month, at least, you know, a 95% completion. There may be a few updates that fall in later this fall. Those future factors will follow along. We'll be looking closely at that in October so that we can bring some options to what we believe will be meeting 2 in November, along with a survey, a second survey. And then after the new year, we'll have the draft land use plan assembled, some of those recommendations, and we'll present those at meeting 3. All 3 of these meetings are meant to be early opportunities to share information, to have constructive comments about what the planning team and the implementation committee should be aware of, and how we can consider those sorts of local perspectives, and be sure to conduct that with the municipal officials and their staff to help make the best decisions for the draft land use plan. Ultimately, it'll be the elected officials hearing from the public in those required public meetings as to whether indeed that draft land use plan is the one that should be adopted and put into place if Exit 26 is approved. Let me see if there's anything else here. All right, next slide. So I've asked Tracy Vernon on our planning team to share some of our working knowledge of the existing conditions related to land use in the planning area. As you look at these next several slides, they're maps, they're interesting. I think they present visually very well. Consider if there's something else about the community or the landscape or other features that we should know as a team and discuss with the committee. So as you're viewing, I ask you to listen with one ear, think with your brain in between the 2 ears, I guess. But feel free to leave a comment in the Q&A or ask a question, and we'll circle back to those at the end of the presentation. So Tracy, over to you for this overview. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. As Michelle indicated, we are finishing up the existing conditions of the land use plan. So what I want to do is take a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, to talk about what we found and some of those related factors that Michelle mentioned. So we'll be talking about land use, zoning, environmental resources, the local transportation network within the planning area that's been identified. And if you'll hold on, I'm having a little lag on my screen here. There we go. So what this slide is showing you, it's showing you generalized land use within the planning area. We've broken down, and this is April 2020 data, the planning area into broad land use categories. So residential, commercial, industrial, agriculture. Just wanted to point out a few highlights. 81% of the residential acreage, so that acreage that's been identified as residential, is single family residential. And the planning area, as you can see in red, there are limited amounts of commercial uses in the planning area, only at 2%. The area in purple, that's industrial acreage. And one thing that we wanted to point out is the bulk of that industrial acreage is in warehouse distribution, so warehouse distribution facilities. The brown areas here are agricultural lands. And the one thing we wanted to point out here is that 64% of those agricultural lands are working lands, meaning that there's some type of agriculture or farming activity taking place. The bulk of the agricultural land is in woodlands. Because businesses and business and industrial parks are a key feature of the planning area, especially particularly in the past east of Interstate 83, we wanted to identify business and industrial parks that are located in the planning area. There is about 8.4 million square feet of industrial space that was identified. Again, this is through land use data from April of 2020. And 83% of that industrial square footage is in warehouse distribution. So again, this map is just showing the business and industrial parks within the planning area. This next slide is showing protected and conserved lands within the area. And you'll note the crosshatch areas that are yellow, that's conservation easement area. So it's 174 acres or 2% of the land. So those are lands that are protected through the Conservation Easement Program of the Farm and Natural Lands Trust of York County. Also, you'll see in the orange crosshatch areas, there are agricultural security areas. So there's about 2,100 acres or 26% of the land area within the planning area is identified as agricultural security areas. One item we wanted to point out too is that the York County Agricultural Land Protection Plan that was from 2008 ranked farmlands for protection. And we wanted to point out that none of the agricultural lands in the planning area were ranked high at that point. All right, moving on to this next slide. What this is representing for you is zoning for all four of the municipalities that we're looking at in terms of the land use plan. So Conewago Township, East Manchester Township, Manchester Township, and Manchester Borough. Wanted to point out though that all zoning is not the same in each municipality. For example, medium density residential in Conewago Township and East Manchester Township and Manchester Township have slightly different development regulations. So just wanted to point out that although this shows zoning within each of the four municipalities, please note that again, they're not all the same in each. The municipal zoning maps we do have posted on the I-83 website. So if you have interest in taking a look at those maps further, they're at the I-83exit26.com. York County also took a look in 2017, updated the county's designated growth areas. So you'll see down on the right-hand side of the slide, the area in dark blue is showing the growth areas within the county. And our planning area, you'll see, is at the very top of a large growth area in the county. You'll note that the areas in blue are the primary growth area, and that's 66% of the planning area. Area that's identified for future growth is here in purple, and that's about 3%. And then there are areas, large portions in Conewago Township. You'll see here also in Manchester Township and a small portion in East Manchester Township have been identified as rural areas. So those are areas that are not designated for intensive use as a primary growth area would be. I'll take a couple minutes to talk about environmental features. So you'll see in the planning area, the planning area is traversed by the little Conewago Creek. This hatched area here are floodplains, and wetlands are most notably associated with the floodplain areas. And then you'll also see in Conewago Township, on the western side of the township, some steep slope areas. And also there's a natural heritage inventory area, the Laurel Run Heritage Area. So these environmental features influence environmental quality, particularly water quality, and any future development would need to consider these environmental features going forward. From a utilities perspective, the planning area is served by the York Water Company. You'll see here the distribution system from the York Water Company, and also chartered territory areas. We'll note that there are, from a sewer perspective, there are 5 sewer authorities that serve the planning area. And for those areas that are not within the sewered areas, soil suitability for septic systems has been identified as limited or severe according to the York County soil survey. Other providers in the area, other utility providers include Columbia Gas, MedEd provides electric. There's low and high voltage electric lines that traverse the planning area, and 1 local substation along Canal Road. And we'll also note that telecommunications and broadband through Comcast, Verizon, and others have been expanding to meet planning area needs. So as Michelle indicated, we've been getting some input from municipalities on local road conditions and potential improvements. So this slide is just giving you a summary, not all of the information we found out, but just a little bit of some of the input that we received on local roads and maybe some potential for improvements going forward. So I'll point out that in Conewago Township, the intersection of Greenbrier Road and Canal Road, the intersection is skewed, so it's at a Y, causing some sight distance issues. We are also told from Manchester Township that there's a possibility of extending West Cron Road north to potentially connect up with a federal mogul facility on Bear Road in the future, and this could help divert truck traffic from Susquehanna Trail. One other item that I'll note is on Bartlett Drive, potentially extending Bartlett between Espresso Way and Zions View Road could potentially help reduce and divert truck traffic from entering Manchester Borough. So again, just a few highlights on local roads. When we complete the existing conditions document, detailed information will be included. From transit and bicycle perspective, the area is served by PA Bicycle Route J going up through Manchester Borough, and a small portion of the northern extension of the Heritage Rail Trail is not within the planning area, but you'll see here it's in East Manchester Township. Also, there's express transit service and local transit service provided through the area into some of the warehouses and industrial parks. And at exit 24, there is a park and ride, and there are transit or bus stops throughout the planning area. And again, as we look forward in the land use plan, we'll make sure that we address potential additional locations or needs for transit and pedestrian access. Moving on to housing, there is an array of housing within the planning area. 81% of the land area is single family housing. 13%, I'll point out, is residential, having no structure. And then the balance, 4%, is either multifamily or 2 to 3 family homes. So we will be considering future residential uses and housing options, such as senior housing facilities, independent assisted skilled care living, and different services. So as we take a look at the land use plan going forward, again, we'll take a look at future residential uses. From a parks and recreation perspective, we've been identifying existing parks and recreation land within the planning area. And again, depending on the type of land use being planned in the area, we'll take a look at the need for additional park and recreation lands to serve the area. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Appreciate that overview. So
Before we ask Michelle, before we get too far, we have a couple of questions that did come in on the last couple of sections that we want to answer.
Sure. We didn't have a slide inserted here, but because they're pertinent to kind of the information we're sharing, it's probably useful to do that. Charles asked a question about sort of the time frame of the preparation process, particularly as elected officials' schedules are often busy, sometimes with budgeting late in the year. I can comment that we are planning those committee meetings well in advance to get them on the calendar. To date, we've had great participation from the municipalities in those meetings. And as we get further, as we get to the point where we're ready to sort of make some evaluation and recommendations, there'll be a little bit more time in between. So we're not going to meet certainly over the holidays, or certainly not be presenting to the public over the holidays, and it'll give us some extra time. If that January presentation drifts just a little bit into February or March, I wouldn't be concerned with that. I think we can still get a draft plan reviewed and brought for consideration spring, summer next year. But we're certainly working to proactively have those meetings scheduled. If you have particular concerns, I ask that you talk with your local officials and share your input with them, as well as respond to the survey. And I'll talk about that in just a minute.
Michelle, can you answer Matt's question about the agricultural lands? Shouldn't we use a survey that's more recent than 2008?
Sure. The topic of agricultural interests came up in our project team meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we have started some conversations with local farmers to get a sense of what their vision is for the future of farming in Northern York County. So while some of the data is in fact a little bit older, we are looking for property owners who are involved or leasing to agricultural operators to get perspective on what that industry might look like, what parts of it might remain the same, and what might be different for that industry as it might evolve into the next decade or the next 50 years, perhaps. So we are looking to sort of round out and modernize that perspective through some stakeholder input that we're conducting. Certainly anyone could respond to the survey with some input on preferences and priorities for agriculture being a part of the future land use pattern, and we'd look forward to reviewing not only where and how much, or particularly where and how much those preferences might occur.
Michelle, this is Felicia. If I could just add on to that, the whole idea of the land preservation strategy that the County Planning Commission adopted, and was adopted as part of the County Comprehensive Plan, is really focused on prime agricultural soils or productive soils. And the soils don't significantly change. They don't change. So I think some of the data for the 2008 plan that the strategy is based on is really based on soil quality, which is something that's just as good today as it was in 2008, if that also helps to flesh out that answer and that issue.
Thanks for reminding me of that. Yes, certain conditions are steady and stable for a long time. Soils are one of them. They don't change very often unless you pave them over and they become inaccessible. All right, Jay, what's next? Any other questions we should answer now?
Yeah, we have another one here about the slide shows that Bear Road needs bridge improvements. The bridge was just replaced within the last 5 years. Why do we need more work on the bridge on Bear Road?
Hi, this is Tracy. That is a comment that we received during our municipal input or conversation. So we'll follow back up to make sure that we can clarify or find the answer to your question.
Okay, Will, there was a question that came in. What is going to be done to Board Road in Manchester with all the new warehouses that keep going up? It's not designed to handle the truck traffic moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's part of the discussion that we're having here with Exit 26. And if that is a solution to the issue on Board Road, that is one of the things that Exit 26 should help with, is reducing the amount of truck traffic on Board Road. So that is still yet to be determined what the results or benefits would be on Board Road, but that is one of the ways that Exit 26 would help, is taking truck traffic off of Board Road. So that will be moving forward, and then there may be recommendations in this comp plan as well, too, that would have to be done, because some of the things that we're working on, if an Exit 26 was ever approved and funded, what are the other off-network road or off Interstate 83 access points that need to be developed or improved before Exit 26 goes in? One of the examples is East Manchester Township is working with developers for improvements to Canal Road through an agreement that they have with some developers that have gone through to improve Canal Road from Espresso Way, well actually from the new plants that are going in there on 921 West to the Susquehanna Trail. So that project is moving forward. So there are some other improvements that need to be done prior to Exit 26 being completed. So that is Board Road. What would have to be done would be part of that discussion. I think Dave might have jumped on as well.
Yeah, what's being currently discussed with the developers, what Will was referring to, is that from Locust Point, Canal Road extended to the Susquehanna Trail is going to be improved. And that, I believe, is the bridge that was referred to. It's not on Bear Road, it's just west of Bear Road. So that bridge is slated to be replaced in this separate project. So that should alleviate some of the traffic on Board Road, but Exit 26 would certainly help in alleviating traffic on Board Road.
All right, Jay, anything else at this time, or shall we circle back to anything else at the end of the meeting?
We have a few more questions that have come in. We can take them now if you want before the next break, or we can save a few questions to the next section.
Okay, let's go on with the public input slides, and we'll circle back to these. That'll give time for people to phrase some questions then about the survey if they have them. So next slide, please, Tracy. So we wanted to introduce the public survey, and this is really going to feed information for our future factors milestone. Particularly, it asks about what the community sees as needs in terms of services, business, jobs, industry, as well as housing needs, and agricultural and open space. And there's certainly options within all of that. We're not necessarily suggesting that all of the planning area needs to be developed. No, very much agricultural and open space have been part of this area's history and very much may play a part in its future. Sort of the what and where becomes some of the interesting decisions to be made around those topics. So we have assembled a survey, an interactive survey, the first of 3 to kind of look for your input on community needs. Next slide, please. And we'll walk through that here. You can find the link for the survey on the I-83 exit26.com webpage. the registration for public meeting. That announcement will probably go away sometime this week, if not tomorrow morning. And click here for survey will be the link available there. It's there now. In fact, we have some early responses to that. And here's what it will look like as you click that link and advance into the survey itself. Tracy? So our first screen, and as you can see here, there are 5 numbered panels, is a welcome. There's a little introductory pop-up box here, a little bit of history about the corridor between exits 26 and 28 and the master plan as a study to identify how to deal with congestion in this particular area. So the first slide is a little bit of orientation, a little bit of reading. You can click the bottom panel where you see the green dot. There are sort of 5 sub-bullets under there, a little bit of extra storytelling to orient you to the planning area and the focus on the need for the land use plan. When you click on slide 2, thanks, survey screen 2 asks for your priorities for land uses in the future. This is a priority ranking activity where each of the white bars, the first one there says farms and agriculture, the second one says redevelopment and so forth. Each of those, as you click on them, there'll be a short description that pops up to the right, I believe a photograph too. What we're asking you to do is from these 7, pick your top 5 that need to be considered or are most important to be considered in the future land use plan for this particular planning area. If you only have 3 you want to suggest, that's fine. But you need to enter or drag those white bars above the yellow line because that's going to feed information on the next 2 slides. Here's an example, just an example, pulled up places to live, places for industry, and here's an example of the description provided for farms and agriculture. You can also provide some comments if you want to provide commentary, description, post some questions. You can do that there by clicking the gray box that says comment. At the very bottom, if you think we haven't covered all the future land uses that need to be there, you can suggest another category and it will come into our results. We will review that there. Slide 3 or screen 3 takes your information from your priority rankings on the yellow page and now brings it into giving you some options on, there's some different types of places to live. So we've got large lot single family, small lot single family, townhomes, apartments and condos, senior housing as 5 potential kinds of places to live. And here on this screen, for each of the residential zones, we're asking you, how much support do you have? Do you agree that this is needed? Do you disagree? Are you kind of neutral on whether this use belongs in our planning area? So this is a slide to kind of work through. There's a lot of choices and preferences that you can express here. But like I said, it builds on what you entered, dragged to the top on the priority rankings number 2 screen to feed into the things that you'll evaluate and give input on here for which uses to plan for here on screen 3, the purple screen. The next one, screen 4, is the last one for real kind of direct input. This is a drag and drop activity. Again, these generalized uses, places to live, business and industry, shop and eat, etc. are, we have these marker icons at the top of the screen and you can drag those to general locations in the planning area. We've included the aerial photograph beneath so you can see lands that have already been developed. You could suggest that something needs to be redeveloped for a different use. You can use that icon on the far right with a question mark to describe that, or drag places to live over a business if that's how you feel about what the future land use plan should represent. You can zoom in and out of this map, move left and right, pan, to place your marker. And once you drop your marker onto the map, this little bubble in the center will pop up and it'll ask you which type of residential. So you'll get the cues then for large lot single family, small lot single family, apartments, condos, etc. And you can choose one type of residential to specify there and then click the submit button. our last slide, yeah, let me see. Anything else I wanted to say there? Sorry. You can drag, I believe, as many as you like to map those preferred locations. Our final screen is number 5, wraps up. This is kind of some demographic information. We want a sense of, who we hear from. Are you someone who lives in the planning area? And we'll look at those zip codes. Or maybe you work or go to school in this planning area, and that'll help us understand who's responding to this input. We're looking for age, we're looking for background, helps us with tracking and reporting for transportation improvements required by state and federal agencies, those sorts of things. You can enter your email at the bottom to be put on the email list, and from there we can indicate, share with you future meeting notices. Be sure that you know when they're able to be registered, able to register for those meetings back on the website. One more click will pop up a green bubble on the right. I ask that after you submit your information in the survey, go back to I-83exit26.com, this link here, and share that information, share the survey link with folks who live in the planning area, so we can get the most well-rounded, best understanding of what people think is needed and appropriate for this planning area for the foreseeable future. Next slide. We're just about finished here. Yep, this was the take it back to the website, share with folks The survey will be open through October 10th. So we have several more weeks for folks to respond to this so that we can then download the results, start to review those results as a planning team and with the committee, and begin working toward our next meeting sometime in November. All right, I believe our final slide then is our Q&A slide for anything else actually in our presentation tonight that you'd like to ask us about. Feel free to use the Zoom Q&A feature there, and we will see who can best answer your questions.
Michelle, we have a few questions here teed up. I think this one's probably best suited for Will. A few questions here from Paul in Amigsville about working out access to the existing rail trail from the village, and was curious if this could be addressed with the new signaling on Amig Road Railroad Bridge, or if there would be any bike lanes. Two-part question to this. Second part was about Exhibit 21 showing a new turning lane through a commercial building at Amig and North George. Do you have a timetable that this would come up? And is there any discussion about which properties would be potentially taken if the intersection expands on a more natural alignment of the road?
Yeah, Paul, the first question I'll deal with, and that is concerning the rail trail and connections and bike lanes. That project is still going through some additional evaluation. That was really the only option that was submitted as part of the I-83 exit 24 to 28 master plan. The conversations that we've had with the township at this point in time is whether or not that's the right fit for the village of Amigsville. So they wanted to look at that location and do a little bit more exploratory evaluation of options that could address the issues of congestion there. So we are going through a process with a second level consultant, and that would be addressed and looked at and evaluated in the bicycling and connections there. We are aware that the township's aware that that will be included in some of that evaluation. And to number two, there is no funding to construct any project at Amigsville and George Street at this point in time. That is, again, still going through that evaluation process. So there is no determination of which properties or what the project actually is at this point in time. So we are still far away from that. It was identified in the plan as a demonstration of what could be done or what kind of improvements would be necessary to meet the needs of the transportation system.
Okay, we have a question here. Has Locust Point Road in East Manchester, Conewago Township, been identified as a problem with heavy tractor trailer traffic on a road not conducive to tractor trailers making turns on the curves? This area has become extremely dangerous for car traffic.
Will, I can answer that. This is Dave Naylor. Yes, we have identified that as a problem area. The tractor trailers are going up north to get on exit 28 up through Locust Point. And you are right, that is dangerous. So that's why the separate project that we're not discussing tonight that will improve the road from Locust Point west to Susquehanna Trail is being seriously considered, and it's in the planning stages. So we are trying to keep tractor trailers from going north on Locust Point. So yes, to answer your question, we agree with you. Thank you.
Another question here. If exit 26 interchange is constructed, one might expect that those municipalities immediately impacted by this activity will benefit financially through an expanded tax base. Is it anticipated that municipalities are going to be asked to contribute financially for the construction of this infrastructural improvement?
Yeah, this is Will. I'll take that one. I do think that that is going to be part of the solution. As I mentioned, $130 million worth of projects in the area. We're going to have to figure out some creative and different ways to fund and get these projects to fruition. There is little way that we would be able to complete all the projects with using just our allocation that we receive through federal and state funding sources on a normal allocation process. So whether it's competitive grants, whether it would be using general tax funds, whether it be using development agreements, whatever that result is, that is unknown, and that will be part of that implementation committee's discussions as we move forward. So that would have to be part of the discussion at least. And to be honest, we have started that discussion with the municipalities. Some of the municipalities have already submitted for applications through PennDOT for competitive funding for improving the Susquehanna Trail, for example. So those projects are already being discussed, and that is already known and laid out to the municipalities that there may be some responsibilities from a financial standpoint at this point in time.
Okay, Michelle, a couple of questions for you here. What priority is given to the input from the public, and in particular, the residents of the affected area in regards to the land use plan? Will the land use plan be reflective of all feedback received, or will priority be given to usages that benefit the townships involved in this project?
Sure, that's a good question, and I think that it really points to some of the reason we're asking for zip code information in the survey information, so that we can see, who's weighing in, and do we need to consider that with a particular weight or sensitivity as the implementation committee discusses that. I think it's our job as the consulting team to really make sure that all of that information is brought to the elected officials and the staff on the implementation committee, and give them the tools to help evaluate that very candidly and very fairly. Ultimately, they will be the ones to say, yes, this is the draft land use plan we're going to advance, and the public will have an opportunity to comment on that again in the review process, in public meetings and public hearings that are part of the review and adoption process. So I think it's kind of a two-parter. The consulting team has a duty to make sure that officials see that information and have a sense of who's giving that input, and then to guide them to consider that fairly.
Last question we have here in the Q&A says, when will the changes to local roads in the affected area be discussed as a part of this project?
Okay, we may get to some of that in the November session where we start to talk about land use options. I think we as a team will want to be cognizant of those local road conditions that kind of interface with any of the future alternatives that we lay out there. In terms of specific recommendations, I think that'll come next year in the report. But like I said, I think we'll need to keep that in view even in the next couple of months as we look at what those options might be and start to lay them out for comment. All right, is that everything, Jay?
There's all the open questions.
All right, thank you. All right, Tracy, last slide is just one to say thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. I've placed our contact information for Will and myself on this screen. It's on that website that we have given you several times tonight, www.i83exit26.com. You can contact us through there as well, or if you think someone should be speaking with us, giving us input either through the survey or speaking with us, please point them to that website so that we can get as well-rounded an understanding of existing conditions and what's best for the future of this planning area as we can through all of your contributions. Will, any closing remarks from you?
I'll just say thank you as well, and feel free to contact us and into that question at the end about local roads. If you have suggestions or comments, you don't have to wait for these specific public meetings to provide Michelle or myself comments. We can take those and address those and incorporate them into the process whenever those questions come to your mind. So thank you very much, appreciate it. And please pass around the survey so that other people can take the survey as well.
Great, thank you, everyone. We look forward to chatting with you again in a couple of months. Have a great night.